color.
Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Rian Keating. Today we have with us a woman whose luminous career has spanned almost 50 years in show business. From modeling for Walt Disney for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs to her recent appearance in Radio City's summer music production of 5, 6, 7, 8 Dance, she has worked in virtually every medium of the entertainment field. However, perhaps she is best known for her collaborating with Gower Champion, during which she has choreographed and performed in television, theater, and films. She later branched out as an actress and has choreographed such films as Whose Life Is It Anyway? And Queen of the Stardust Ballroom, for which she received an Emmy Award. We're delighted to welcome Marge Champion. Marge, welcome to Spotlight.
Thank you.
It's said that you were in a tutu at 9 months.
Well, that's a joke. I mean, naturally, I was in a tutu. My father was a dancing teacher. And so they fixed me up this cute little tutu and put me in it and made photographs. But I didn't really start to dance until I was about 6 or 7. As I said, he was my father, Ernest Belcher, was a well-known dancing teacher on the West Coast, and he believed that young people should not start formal ballet training until they were 7, at least. Because I'd been around it so much, I'm sure a little of it rubbed off from, just hanging around the dancing school. But they've even come to that belief in the Iron Curtain countries now, where in the Soviet Union and places like that, that they don't start the children as young there as they used to.
Do you feel there would be any repercussions in starting younger than 6 or 7?
I think that you get tired of it. I think that by the time you're 13 or 14, you just don't want to do it anymore. And also, it is ballet itself is a very, very difficult discipline. And I think you can overtrain the muscles when you start too young. And there's a lot of reasons for not really, starting at 3, 4, 5. That's babysitting, and it's fine if you want your little girl or your little boy to flit around to music and do that, But it really has nothing to do with dance.
At what age did you start taking it seriously?
Well, it's more like, what age did he start? Did my father start deciding that this was now serious business for me? I think I didn't really take it seriously until I was about 13, 12 or 13. By then I'd had a lot of dancing. But that was kind of a lucky break for me. I had tired of it by then. I really didn't want to dance forever. I would much rather have gone to play football in the lot with the kids and all of that, touch football, all that stuff. But the depression came along, and my father couldn't afford at that time. The first thing that anybody cut out was their dancing lessons. So he couldn't afford to have assistants, and I became his assistant. And that gave me a sense of participation and responsibility. And if I were demonstrating for one of his pupils, and some of them were quite famous, like Shirley Temple and Harold Lloyd's 2 kids, and so that if I were demonstrating, I had to do it correctly myself, and it really, really, focused me and made me shape up is the word.
You were the model for Snow White. How did that happen to come about?
Well, that was right out of the dancing school. They had this film that they wanted. They wanted to have a live-action model. In animation, the animators usually take the movements and the dramatic things right out of themselves. They have little mirrors next to them, and they look at themselves and they make terrible faces and do all of that. And that the animals or the dwarfs or any of those characters they take from themselves. But a pretty young girl is not, what are they going to do? Look at this mirror and they're going to see those hairy faces there, and it isn't really inspiring. So they would take 16 millimeter motion pictures of me going through the action as they saw. Now, how it happened was that they looked all over town for a girl of 13 or 14 who had had a lot of dance background, but was not an actress per se, because this was really more of a pantomiming job than it was. And in those days, there wasn't a lot of pantomime being done the way it is now. And they came to our school along with quite a few others, and they picked 3 of us out of the class, and I was the one who got the job. I think as much because I looked like their conception of Snow White as my qualifications.
You had a sister who was very influential on your career.
Well, she was my half-sister, and she was quite well known at the time. She's a good deal older than I am, but I don't know whether she influenced me as much as I thought she was the most glamorous woman. I still think she is the most glamorous woman that ever walked, and she's funny, and she's just one of the great gals. She was in Ziegfeld Follies in the 20s, and she was in Lemaire's Affairs and George White Scandals, and her name was Lena Basquette. But then she went into, about 25, 30 years ago, she went to raising dogs, and she became the really top Great Dane raiser, handler.
Oh, that's really quite a switch.
Oh, yeah. And for the last 25, 30 years, she's been in the dog business. She has a great star now by the name of Special K, who's gotten first, best of shows all over the country.
How supportive were your parents of your career? You had said that your mother was a stage mother for your half-sister,
yeah,
but not necessarily for yourself.
Well, I don't remember her discouraging me, but my parents were supportive because that's the business we were in. It was expected of me to be in dancing. In fact, when I sort of lagged in interest, that was, that was the worst part. Had to, dream up a depression to get me interested again.
You had wanted to go to UCLA, but they had sort of frowned upon the idea.
Yeah, my dad did not think it was a good idea for me to go to college. In those days, there wasn't a college in the country that had that offered a degree in any kind of dance. If you did dance, it was strictly on top of your academic studies and was an elective, just like drama was. There were very few drama departments. There were drama clubs, but not drama departments, and not departments that offered degrees. So it was really that your best years of performing are between 18 and, some of the best years, 18 and 22, as far as a dancer is concerned. And if you're using those up in going to college, you've cut your career in half if you're a ballet dancer. I never did become a ballet dancer per se. That was not but it was my basic training, and I think that my father always felt that I would be headed in that direction. He wanted me to be in a ballet company.
At what point did you decide to come to New York and pursue a career?
Well, I guess I was about 19, and I got picked because of Snow White. I got picked by the Three Stooges. They had a vaudeville unit. It was, and they went. They were going to be out 10 weeks, and they had other acts besides themselves. And they picked me to do in my Snow White costume. I was presented as the model for Snow White because my picture had been on Life magazine at the time, and I did in their unit what was known, Variety reviewed it as a fair toe dance, and that was one of my better reviews. And I traveled with them for 3 weeks, and then the vaudeville show hit rather bad times, and we closed in Buffalo, and I decided to come to New York instead of going back to California.
So what were your first impressions of New York at that time?
It was a big city. It was a real big city, but I don't know. It's hard for me to say. I was very, very naive at 19 or 20. I had a lot of spunk, but I was really naive, and I didn't pay too much attention to what my feelings were about things. I was real excited to see shows and to meet the people that I was beginning to meet, and I was very excited to take classes with other teachers besides see, in California I couldn't study with anyone else because that wouldn't have been really good form.
Did you find success easily as a dancer in New York?
No. Studying was my main business, and I was in 5 shows. I auditioned for and was in 5 shows, but they were all flops. Actually, that's not a bad way to start, is to have a lot of sort of tasty flops, because you get to be in more shows that way. I remember once when I was working with, I directed Hal Linden and Lee Remick this year in a cable version of I Do, I Do.
Yes.
And Hal said that he and Jerry Orbach started at the same time. And he was in 17 shows at the same time that Jerry Orbach did 5. Jerry got all the long run hits and he got one flop after another. But when it came to doing Barney Miller, that was not a bad training ground for him.
Not at all. Yeah. So when did you find success as a dancer?
Well, it depends what you mean. I mean, I always got nice reviews for myself, but the real, kind of big time happened after Gower and I teamed up. And that was almost instantaneous.
Well, you had known Gower for some time previous to that.
We had known each other as children, and actually we were like 12 years old when we met at Bancroft Junior High School.
And do you recall your first impressions of him?
Well, he was the second shortest boy in the class, and he was very good looking. And all the girls called him the young prince because he had very good manners, which was, even in those days, not as in Bancroft Junior High there were about 2 boys with good manners, and he was one of them. He also was a very good ballroom dancer, and he came up, we were exactly the same height. And about 3 years later, when I met him in New York, see, we were 12 then, we met again when he was about 17 or 18, we both were, in New York, and he had grown 6 inches or 8 inches. He suddenly shot up to 6 feet, and he'd been 5'2" when I last saw him. So that was a pleasant and wonderful surprise.
So how did it evolve that you came to partner up?
I was in a show with Paul Godkin, who was my first dancing partner. Actually, he was my second. But he had modeled for the witch in Snow White when I did Snow White. And he was also a pupil of my father's. And we were in a show called Beggar's Holiday, which was the Duke Ellington version of Threepenny Opera. And Paul had said to me, look, we can double into the Waldorf. Let's get a couple of routines together and we'll double into the Waldorf on the midnight show. And Gower was in town, and I said, Paul said that it would be a nice idea if we doubled into the Waldorf. And Gower suddenly turned around. He'd been in service, and he said, well, if you're going to dance with anybody, you're going to dance with me. And we started looking for a rehearsal hall the next day. It was in 1947, in about January 1947.
At what point did it become more than just professional?
Well, we had, it was a strange and wonderful relationship that we had, because we sort of went through all different phases of the personal part, because we were kind of smitten with each other when we were 15. Later on, we had, one of those let's keep it gay romances in New York, but nothing serious. And it really, I guess, became serious when, after we had opened in Montreal, and we played the Bradford Roof and a couple of other places, and I had a chance to go into a Rodgers and Hammerstein show. I had been called back from my 3rd audition, and it looked very much as though I was going to get it. And by then we'd already opened, and I was very torn and very upset the day that I came into New York to do my final audition for this show. And we were sitting at Schraff's, and and I think I was crying, and he said, well, look, don't worry about it. The same thing as he said, don't worry about it, I'll get another partner, I'll go to St. Louis and do the show, do our act. And he said, and we're going to be married, so we'll just work this whole thing out. And I said, we are. I mean, that's a wonderful way of deciding and asking me to marry, and we laughed a lot, and I never went back for that audition.
Well, that sounds terrific. You had been with Gower sort of pioneers in television.
Oh yes. In 1947, the year we were married, we did a whole midnight show. I mean, we did a tango at 9 o'clock and at 10 o'clock. This was on NBC, and I think there were 2,000 sets in this area. And we did a foxtrot at 10 o'clock and something else at 11 o'clock, and at 12 o'clock we did this big waltz. And so we that spanned the. It was very hot in that studio, and we had decided to do this waltz to the second half of a record that we had, because there was no live music, of course. And they put on the wrong half of the record. And about halfway through this dance, we both realized that it was never going to end. I mean, it was like a 5-minute number, and we were only going to do 2.5 minutes. And we didn't have anything choreographed for it. So the record went on for as much as we had choreographed, and then suddenly Gower gave me his arm like this, and I put it like that, and we walked off right in the middle of the record because we didn't have anything more to do.
So much for live television.
Yeah.
You got a lot of national prominence out of your television exposure.
Yes, we did. And we also got picked to go to Washington to perform for President Truman on one of these big shows that they had, I don't know, White House Correspondents' Dinner or something. And because of that, and he mentioned us in his speech afterwards, because it reminded him of some vaudeville days and so on and so forth. And because of that, we got our pictures on the cover of Life, which was, in those days, a real big leg up. And from then on, we did clubs until we went to California. Well, going to California was really, we didn't plan to do that. Gower had been hired to do, or at least we thought he had been, to do the dances for a major show in New York, which was Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Mm-hmm. And then at the last minute that fell through, and we didn't have anything else booked for the summer. So we thought, well, we could save money by going to California and staying with his mother. But Charlie Morrison, who ran Macombo, which was a nightclub on the Sunset Strip, which never paid its performers because he never had any money. Anyway, he called and said, would we open there? And everybody told us not to do it. It was a tiny place, very small, but we had nothing else to do. So we took the job, and from there on, that's where our movie career, because nobody hired married couples to be in musicals in those days.
Do you feel that you had more creative freedom in films as opposed to television?
I don't know. You don't have, I mean, you're always subject to somebody's monitoring. We always did pretty much because we weren't doing anything so avant-garde that people were going to say, oh no, you can't do that. We were a very popular kind of dance act. And what we did was we sang and we danced, and it was sort of an extension of musical comedy. In fact, we put the act together originally simply because we didn't want to audition for Broadway shows. We wanted people to come and see us at the Persian Room. And we never did do a Broadway show. I mean, we directed a lot of them, but we never did do one. The closest we came to it as a team was when we were doing a show with Harry Belafonte and the voices of Walter Schumann. And we traveled that for 6 months, and then we played 3 months at the Plymouth Theater.
You had given up the duo, and at the time you had said that it was very good for your marriage. You had retired to have children.
Yeah. Well, I retired. It's harder to look after kids than it is to be in the rehearsal hall.
Well, I think you had said at the time that you were not one of those super-duper types who could manage both a career and a family.
No. I waited a long time for my first boy, and I was not about to give that over to somebody else to do. And I admire people who can do it both. I simply couldn't. I just didn't have that much energy, and I'm full of energy. But
did you find there were any repercussions from having children so late?
Well, I now have a nice grown-up producer son. No, I don't see. I tell you, I really appreciate it, and it was much more. I didn't resent any of the time that I spent with the kids. That just was not it anymore. You know, I think if you have them very young and you're bent on a career, you might feel that there's a conflict there. But I didn't really resent that.
When you had returned to performing, you decided to become an actress, and you'd done a lot of straight acting. How did you find the transition to go from dancing to acting? Did you find that difficult?
Well, I don't think I ever really made it. So, you know, I acted and I studied a lot, and I think it's standing me in very good stead for directing. But I don't, you know. My goals were always to be the best at everything, and I think I was an adequate actress. So I don't know whether I really ever made the transition or not. I enjoy acting a lot, and if anybody has a part for, let's say, an elderly dancer, well, I'm there ready to take it. But you see, Maureen Stapleton is an actress with a capital A, and if I think I would have liked to been there. And if I were going to be a singer, I think I would really like to come back as Edie Gourmet. You know, those are top people. I can sing, I can act, but I don't think I'm an actress.
How do you feel that your acting has helped your dancing?
You know, incredibly, because I do everything from an acting point of view. It isn't. It all has a motivation, and I don't care what step it is. There is something that motivates it. Well, even if it's a feeling, at least I know how to get in touch with that feeling. But the stories are the things that I like to tell in dancing.
You had been married to Gower for 25 years, which I think by show business standards is probably something short of a miracle, but by any standards today it's a very good track record. At what point did you realize that it would be better if you had decided to take separate paths?
Well, of course, it's not all one thing, but and there were no villains in this breakup. It seemed as though our careers were our careers. Mine mostly as a volunteer, because I did go into a lot of volunteer work in California after we settled down there, and his direction was taking him more and more to New York when we had settled back in California. And I think the constant separations during that time really laid the groundwork. We had been, our marriage had come together on a different contract. And I think all marriages have either a spoken or an unspoken floor or contract. And ours changed so radically after those 24 years that it wasn't real healthy, either for us, for me, for him, nor for the children. And it was a painful, very painful decision to make. But once it was made and once it was acted on, we found that we had a better relationship than we'd had maybe for 5 or 6 years before that, because we then had a relationship where we could talk to each other as friends, which we had always been, and we had this incredible tie of 2 wonderful boys.
After you had been divorced, how did you find relating to other people? Because during the time you were married, there were a lot of social changes that went on in the country, such as the sexual revolution. Did you find that difficult to deal with, or was it?
I think I was always liberated in that direction. I was one of those young people who came to New York and was very liberated. I saw nothing wrong in seeing a number of gentlemen during my salad days, not during my married days. But I think that I enjoyed dating, but I enjoy a one-to-one relationship more. And that's very important to me. And I was single for about 3.5 years, and saw a lot of different people and a lot of it was hard for me to relate for a little while to the couples we had been friends with. It wasn't their problem. They were wonderful and supportive and great, but it was my problem. I needed to kind of branch out with different people. And I made a lot of new friends, as well as, thank God, keeping most of the old ones. But then I met a wonderful man by the name of Boris Segal, who I had no intention of marrying because he had 5 children. But somewhere in me there was this real conservative streak that said I couldn't go on having this marvelous romance with him when we had 4 teenagers at home. And the other kids were older by that time. So we married, and we had a really, really wonderful kind of working because I worked with him too. I've been privileged to work with 2 of the top directors, and Boris Segal was a top television and movie director, and we did a lot of films on location: Masada, The Awakening Land, Diary of Anne Frank, and I worked with him on all of those films, either as dialogue coach or as choreographer, or sometimes in casting. And I learned a lot about direction from him too. And I now have 7 kids instead of 2.
Well, you've been very fortunate. You became a widow by very sad circumstances. And one thing Kitty Carlisle had said in an interview, that no matter how hard the first year was after Moss Hart had died, it was the second year that was even more difficult because there was such a letdown. What support systems did you utilize?
Well, just about everyone in the book. First of all, I sold our home and I moved east. And that was, I think, a really good thing for me to do. It forced me into a whole new set of circumstances, and I found a place to live in Massachusetts that I dearly love. We had bought that home as a retreat house before Boris was killed, but I see, for me, the first year was more difficult than the second. I remember Waldo Salt, who's a famous screenwriter, Day of the Locust and other films like that, coming up to me at Boris's memorial and taking me by the shoulders and saying, "It'll take 2 years. Don't be impatient." And he was right. It took about 1.5 years.
Well, you've been very fortunate. We appreciate your stopping by today and sharing with us, Marge.
Thank you.
This is Rian Keating, and if you have any comments, you can write to myself at 640 10th Avenue, New York, New York, 10036. For Spotlight, this is Rian Keating. Have a good week.